So the first time I voted was for this year's midterm elections, the 2023 elections, and this was after the overturn of Roe, and also post January 6th, and just a lot of far right ideology happening in so many states in the U.S. And I felt like I was voting to preserve our democracy, and that really made me really want to get involved in voter registration on campus. So throughout my free time last semester, I was volunteering after class and trying to register students to vote. And my campus actually we got the highest voter registrations of 1,100. We registered 1,100,000 students to vote. And
1,100,000.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes, and it was very exciting, and we felt really accomplished because we were worried because New York is sometimes they can flip Republican or Democrat. So we were telling students vote for, we're nonpartisan, but I was telling my friends you please vote. I know people don't feel like they have to vote, especially if you live in a blue state. You think your vote doesn't count. Oh, we're safe. We don't need to vote. It doesn't even matter. But it really felt important because there were a lot of, I guess, misinformation spreading about crime rates, and also law and order antics, and that whole rhetoric of having a punitive paradigm, and just bringing that back to New York State, and just wanting to police Black and brown bodies. And when I took that into consideration, and also the rights of women and our reproductive rights, I felt like it was really adamant to just push for my friends and the people I knew in my classes to vote. And so I went to a lot of voting, Get Out the Vote rallies. They had one for Kathy Hochul at Columbia, and then I went to one in Yonkers where President Biden spoke. And that was really inspiring to see him speak with Kathy Hochul. And I do disagree on her with some things because she does not a big supporter of CUNY like I would like her to be. But she was definitely a supporter of women's rights and reproductive rights, and not trying to have all these anti laws on education and censorship and reproductive rights. And I know she would protect the rights of women and the rights of LGBTQ people, and I think that's really important. And voting this election, I think it was also voting for my family and those who can't vote. That's when I vote, I think of my friends who are dreamers and they're not able to vote, and I'm voting for them and what they need and their values and their necessities, making sure they have affordable education, because a lot of my friends go to CUNY, and CUNY is a Hispanic serving institution, and so many students are immigrants and first generation students. And when I vote for myself, I'm voting for my community as well. And I think that's for a lot of New York City folks, since our city is so diverse and so many people are immigrants, we're voting for our communities as well. And I'm voting for my grandparents and my mom and my dad, because my grandparents came here to build the American dream, to have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. My grandfather, he was persecuted in Dominican Republic during the Los 12 Años. It's a 12-year regime of anti-opposition, and he was a socialist, and they killed him in DR. And then my grandmother fled DR with my dad, and they built a life here. And I know she came here to have the freedoms that she couldn't have in Dominican Republic. And when I carry that with me, and that just story with me when I'm doing advocacy and organizing, because I want to make sure that America can live up to its ideals that are so fundamental and just essential in their human rights, and we should live up to our ideals. Last semester, students at NYPIRG, at Hunter NYPIRG and Queens NYPIRG, and all the NYPIRGs throughout New York State, we united to advocate for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and that would just secure voting rights and also protect our essential right to vote. And it was really important for all students, especially when we think about states that are threatening the rights of students to vote, in Michigan, and I think in New Hampshire too. They want to make it more difficult for students who are attending a college where they're not permanent residents. It will be harder for them to get vote if they just show proof of their residency for just a couple months, or they're renting an apartment. You can't even that won't be enough to vote in that state. And if you miss an election in some states, they'll remove you off the voting roll. So I think it was very important to advocate for that bill, just to secure our rights to vote when we see there is a pushback for young voters in getting to the polls. And I think it's important to note, because sometimes like my generation feels hopeless when we see like so much rollbacks, like reproductive rights, anti-LGBTQ laws being passed, and censorship on race-based teachings on like Latino history, Black history, Chicano history. But I think we see that they recognize our strength. They do, because when they are making laws to try to take away our rights to vote, they clearly see that we are growing in numbers and our advocacy is also powerful. So I think it calls for us to take more action and in the long run, and to continue mobilizing and organizing. Currently, I'm a resident at Yonkers, and currently there is my city council member is running for mayor. Corazon Pineda, she's running for mayor, and she's my city council member at the moment. And she's running against an 11-year incumbent, and she's advocating for an increase in public education and investment in public education, and also for the expansion of affordable housing. And she's running against someone who has extended his term limits twice, and he has abused his power as mayor by extending his term limits so much. And our community has changed, and it's more Dominican and Mexican and Latino, and he does not understand the needs of the families in those communities, that we need more investment in our public education so students can have more extracurricular activities when parents are at work, and also have schools that have good infrastructure. There are just like so many issues in Yonkers public schools where like the ACs aren't working, or just like things are broken and the heating's not working in some facilities, and there's like money where we can't trace in some projects. Mm-hmm. And Corazon Pineda wants to invest in our communities, and she understands that investing in the youth is investing in Yonkers. And I think she's making an important step for change and representation. And I think her voice is needed to meet the needs of today's people and today's residents. So during my second semester at Hunter, I became a project leader for our environmental protection campaign. And there was two policies that I worked closely on, and that was the Local R97 and also the All Electric Buildings Act. Local R97 we were calling on the mayor to implement the policy. It's probably the most ambitious policy in the world at the moment, requiring the transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy for New York City buildings. And this will decrease carbon emissions significantly. And this is really important for so many New Yorkers, since when we think of like the South Bronx or Queens, they have some of the highest asthma rates, and most of those people are Black and brown people. And I was born in the South Bronx. My cousins, they have extremely high asthma. They have asthma, severe asthma. One of them was like hospitalized for, they had an asthma attack and they were hospitalized for it. My grandfather lived in the South Bronx and he died because of lung cancer. And of course, the pollution in the South Bronx contributed to that, and the Cross Bronx Expressway. And all the structural and environmental racism is explicit in New York City, and you can see it. And this law is very important to just repair the damages that have been done, and also protect our environment and our public health. And I hope we can get this implemented soon, and I'm continuing to advocate for that. And we're also working on the All Electric Buildings Act. So I've spoken at rallies alongside Senator Kavanaugh and Assembly Member Emily Gallagher to implement the All Electric Buildings Act, which would require all new buildings to be built with which would require all new buildings to have renewable energy, and that's like wind energy, clean energy, electric, and not fossil fuels. And this act is really essential for New York to be a model policy, to have the model policy for moving forward in a green new path and a clean path, to hopefully be a model for the U.S. in our transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. Yeah. And currently at the moment, I'm interning at the New York Birth Control Access Project. I began as a volunteer. I volunteered because after the Dobbs decision, I wanted to get involved in some way, just like in my community, and expanding reproductive justice, because we saw an increase of people coming from the South and from like states like Florida and Texas, and coming to New York as a safe haven to get abortions, and our facilities have been overwhelmed. So expanding birth control access is critical in that fight to protecting reproductive rights and having reproductive justice. And one of the bills we worked on was pharmacists to prescribe birth control. 21 states already have this policy, but New York doesn't, and we've been advocating for years, since 2019. And it actually just passed the Senate and the Assembly, and we're waiting for the governor to sign it. And it was really empowering to like see it all done, because we went to Albany on February 27th to meet with legislators and to advocate for the policy, just explain like how 1.2 million women live in contraceptive deserts, meaning that they don't have adequate access to contraception, to birth control. And like, this bill will allow pharmacists to prescribe the pill, the shot, and allow pharmacists to prescribe the pill and also the patch, and the the pill, and the patch, and other forms of contraception. And this is really important because it would increase the number of contraceptive providers per person by nearly 80%. And this will really impact rural New Yorkers and also low-income New Yorkers where they don't have that access in their communities. And right now we're also advocating for ECs and vending machines for SUNY and CUNY campuses. This bill will require SUNY and CUNY to have at least one vending machine with emergency contraception available for purchase for students in their campus. And we are going to Albany actually on Monday to advocate for this bill. And we're going to meet with senators and SLAM members to explain why we need this in our campuses. 33 campuses already have ECs in their vending machines, but New York State doesn't. And we need to move forward and hopefully be the first state to have emergency contraception in their vending machines. And to be really important, because when you think of like a young person and they don't have a car in their college campus, like, and there's like, think of Buffalo University, like they can't even, you're in a snowstorm, you can't go to CVS because you don't have a car during the snowstorm, and then there's no access to ECs, Plan B on your campus. So if you had a vending machine there, you wouldn't have to go out and during the snowstorm in Buffalo, and you could just get that Plan B right there for probably $15, because when we buy it in bulk, it decreases the price significantly. Because right now in a lot of pharmacies, it's about $40 or $50 just to get Plan B. And this will just help students with affordability, and I think it's critical in expanding access for young folks during this time when we are seeing a rollback on reproductive rights. Being involved in my community is really important as Latina, because I'm being involved to represent the underrepresented. And that's just essential for our community when we're continuously seen as forever foreigners since like the beginning of this nation, even though we've been a part of America forever. And before the founding fathers were here, we were here, Mexicans were here. And I'm doing this work because I need to represent those who can't speak up, those who are essential, and those who are working hard just as us. We just want the same thing. We want a good life, a good paying job, a roof over our heads, and food on the table. But right now we are seeing threats to Latinos across the U.S. And as we hear the great replacement theory rhetoric, people believe that we are going to replace classic Americans when we all just want the same thing. We want to have that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and we deserve it. And so when I do this work, I'm doing this work for my grandparents who came here, and why they came here was to build a good life and to build that American dream and to build a life where their children could have opportunity. And this work is to represent those who are underrepresented in our democracy. The first time I saw myself represented in politics was probably when AOC won office for Congress, and that took too long, I think. But then I saw myself like I can get involved in politics and organizing and grassroots work, and then that really pushed for me to do volunteer work in that sector, and that's why I got involved in NIPRG on my campus to advocate for basic things like free public higher education, environmental justice, and housing rights, and also reproductive justice. But I think that now with the age of social media, it's really important for all young folks to use their power of just being tech savvy and just expand. We are so interconnected, and we're constantly on our phones. And as a young Latina, we have the power to mobilize thousands and millions of people just through our phones. And at this moment, we are continuously seen as outsiders, and we lived in a tiered democracy, especially if you think about Puerto Ricans and how they are citizens, but really citizens in name only when they don't have welfare or social services access unless they live on the mainland. Or we think about Mexicans who have been in America before it was founded, and they are still seen as outsiders. They're seen as criminals, but we are American too, and it doesn't mean that we are American just because of our citizenship, but we are American because we're building a life here. I think that makes us American. And as a young Latina, I am proud to of my grandparents coming here and their heritage and why they left the U.S. why they left why they left Ecuador and Dominican Republic was to build a better life here. And I want to make sure that this nation America can live up to its ideals of its freedoms. But at this moment, I think that we see those freedoms are threatened with the rollbacks on democracy and on voting rights and amongst Black and brown people and young people, and reproductive justice attacks on reproductive rights, from abortion to birth control, and also the censorship of our history, of an untold history. And I think that that's really dangerous because that's a threat to knowledge. And when you control the minds of young folks, you can have power over that community, over that society. And ultimately, I think that we are doing the work now that needs to be needed. If you look at Tennessee or Florida, how people are organizing there in response to gun violence, we have the power to mobilize. And I think it's being recognized as a threat by some people, but also it's becoming a movement amongst us. And I think that everyone needs to mobilize in their communities and have those tough conversations with those that differ, and just demystify the lies and empower those around you and mobilize your community. Yeah, do good in all the ways you can ultimately.